I mean, there was a phase change in the economy around 1970 that I cannot get people to focus on. And if you look at like GDP, which is a very flawed measure, and median male income, which Tyler Cohen, I think, was the one who pointed out that this is the best version of the argument. One of these things, they're both going up together until like 1970, and then one of them flatlines and the other keeps going. And the idea that this is not a structural change that is in every school textbook, and that we don't understand that we've built up 2+ generations of experts lying about what happened. And
what do you think happened? Why did that? Because I've read criticisms of the decoupling theory.
Nobody likes my version of it, but I'd
like to know,
Sure.
because I don't understand it.
Everyone who cares about this stuff should read a guy named Derek DeSola Price, who was active in the late 50s and started talking about there will be a singularity in science. So he looked at
Price's law.
Yeah, number of PhDs, number of journals, amount of funding. Everything was going up exponentially, and things that go up exponentially cannot continue. And so he predicted this is going to end because there will be too many PhDs per child. And sure enough, that system sort of came apart. So if you look at the period from between 1945 to 1970, you have this growth regime. And everything that got built during that time has what I call an ego, an embedded growth obligation. If it doesn't grow at this rate, it's going to turn pathological. And so we built a ton of infrastructure around this beautiful period of high, broadly distributed, fairly even and stable technologically led growth. And that ended. And then began this crazy period of excuse making where we found every gimmick known to man. And if you want to read an article about this, I think I wrote one called Anthropic Capitalism and the New Gimmick Economy. And so part of the problem is that the concept of jobs as how we feed ourselves rather than creative enterprises or something else, jobs are probably tied to a period of time that isn't going to go on forever, and it's probably weakening as a means of feeding us. So the market was unbelievably brilliant, and then there was a structural change, and now the question is, how do we account for these egos that make embedded growth obligations, that make liars of all of the experts who service the institutions? So the big problem that we're having, the reason we can't wake up from this madness, is that you've had since about 1970 people having to lie to keep the institutions afloat. So
what's the lie?
Well, take a law firm. The idea is you have some number of partners. The partners have associates. All the associates want to become partners. So you have to tell them a story about if you work hard, you will become partners. But when you hit steady state, like the professor wants to have 20 students. The 20 students want to become professors to have 20 students. None of this stuff works anymore.
But the income mobility levels...
Your thing, it's a hidden, what do you call that game?
It's a hidden pyramid scheme.
It's a hidden pyramid scheme.
But the income mobility levels since 1980 have been relatively stable in the United States.
Well, we've been a very rich family trying to figure out ways to live out our days in the style to which we've become accustomed. And we found every kind of gimmick known to man, whether it's offshoring or mergers and acquisitions or self-regulation of markets. All of these things that we learned how to do.
Is the big problem just the transfer over to the service economy as opposed to in the intellectual economy as opposed to manufacturing?
Well, the thing is that a lot of this was led by something like science in the form of, let's say, just semiconductors coming out of physics. How much of our current growth has been scientifically led. And now, with Moore's law, the reason everybody talks about it is it's one of these growth laws that can't go on forever. So
although it's been doing pretty well. I mean, part of it, I know, things that are impossible can't continue forever. That's the rule, right? And the doubling seems to be one of those things.
And the idea is that we've been pretty good staving off disaster for a very long time.
But it seems to me, though, that there is, like, this is perhaps part of the contradiction that people are wrestling with, is like, and you're pointing to structural deception, let's say, something like that, and the delusions that go along with it. But it also does seem to me, and this is where the measurement issues become so complicated, is that even though wages among men have been flat since the 1970s, I think you could make a pretty cogent case that we are actually, in many ways, much richer than we were. First of all, the world's much richer. There's much less poverty worldwide, and in an absolute sense as well. And so even if the average American isn't richer, let's say, although we could dispute that, the world that surrounds him is much richer, and that actually constitutes a form of accrued wealth. Because you're actually safer when a quarter of the Chinese aren't starving and a quarter of the Indians aren't starving.
This.
Okay, but then I would also say, although there's been local stagnation in the West, arguably, there's been massive global improvements. But then the other question is the idea of local stagnation actually accurate? Because there are lots of ways that we are clearly way richer than we were. Now, we're certainly richer in terms of our access to high quality information at a very, very low cost. And so the technological revolution seems to be real. And we can purchase a lot more of this high quality technology for less money than we could. So I'm not entirely convinced of the wage stagnation argument.
There's a tremendous amount to be done about the metrics about how we measure these things. There's also a total flaw that is suffused throughout economics. I just came back from 4 days in Venice, and the first day in Venice, I thought, this place is unreal. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Every 52 years didn't prepare me for this.
Right.
4 days later, I was like, wow, there's so many tourists, and okay, you go over this bridge again. It took almost no time to remove that level of magic because I got used to it that quickly. Right?
Right. Yeah, well, that's a problem. We get used to things that are going well extraordinarily
hedonic
quickly.
numbing is a real issue.
Oh,
The other thing is that what were the Gini coefficients measuring the inequality during the period that was going up? We're now in a period of such inequality that humans are very focused on things like status.
Yes.
And so it's not clear to me that people wouldn't be actually happier in a totally different regime. I mean, we have enough plastic stuff from China. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Now, in all of that, my claim,
so that's an interesting issue, because one of the things we could say, perhaps, is that between 1945 and 1972, what was provided for people wasn't so much a standard of living that's higher than we have now, but a trajectory of development that appeared more stable and believable.
And
so,
low variance.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Well, and then the question is, well, what actually do you want? Do you want a high standard of living, or do you want to believe that if you put in incremental effort, your life can improve? Mm-hmm. And it could easily be that people will rather have that.
The ability to make a 30-year plan.
We want the ability.
Yeah. Yes. If what I value is the ability to make a 30-year plan, and I want to have some idea of how I'm going to get to my retirement and put kids through school and do all of this, and I want
and then it's this plan.
Yeah.
Right.
So the idea
is the predictability is gone, no question. I mean, there's too much volatility.
Right.
But
that's why I said jobs are not going to be the means of redistribution of the wealth.
Right. I do wonder if, on the individual level, I think that that's, you're right. There's an enormous amount of chaos and volatility in the system, but I think that the only thing that you can say to that is the same thing that's been true for most of human history. Okay, the time when people could actually stably predict that in 30 years I will be significantly better off than I am now, and I can make a retirement plan. That's about 50 years of human history. Right? I mean, before that, it was basically you have two kids, one of them dies, and then your wife dies in childbirth with the second.
You don't have two.
You have 8, right? And you have 8, and 6 of them die. 3 are miscarriages, and and so this dream that we had from 1940 to 1970, even if I accept the premises, I'm not sure that that's a realistic dream about what
that was
human
my point.
beings did. Yeah,
that was the anthropic capalism. You just described it.
Okay, good. So not enough for your article, but it's
there's a little bit more in there.
No, I'm sure there is. I'm just joking. But the only point I'm going to make, the only point I'm making is that I think that what really has been lost, and this is the part that I'm really focusing on a lot lately, is we can't control the situation around us, but we can control our reactions to the situation. And what I mean by that is these massive systemic changes that we're talking about, we, number one, don't agree on what those systemic changes should be.
Right.
And number two,
or even what they are.
Right, what they are or what they would do, right? Nobody knows what the hell they would do. And with all of that said, the one thing that you can control is the amount of virtue that you yourself pour into your life. And it seems to me in a non-virtuous position that because somebody else is earning more than you, you are therefore worse off. And so what we really have lost, I think, and this may be an outgrowth. I mean, there's an argument to be made. I know Jonah Goldberg makes this argument, for example, that sort of late-stage capitalism or advanced capitalism tends to lead to this rat race where we are looking at what the guy next door to us has. But the lack of just basic virtue in the position that I am worse off because my neighbor is better off, even though I have more stuff than I did 5 years ago. The lack of inculcation of any sense of what I would call basic morality is having a significant impact.
Well, one of the things that's happening clearly in the tour that I'm doing and the people that I'm talking to is I'm actually making a variant of that case. I said that, and it's probably in keeping with your vision as well. So let's imagine that a rising tide does lift all boats, and that's actually happening, but we're purchasing that at the price of a certain degree of predictability and stability into the future. That seems quite clear. And that's exaggerated by this incredibly rapid rate of technological change. It's like, okay, so how do we tolerate all that uncertainty, given that we're also deriving substantial benefit from it? We don't want to mess it up. And what I've been suggesting to my audiences is get your act together as much as you possibly can, because the way that you deal with uncertainty is by being prepared for anything and everything that's going to come your way. And so you want to put yourself together so that when the difficult decisions come along, even though we can't predict what they are, you're going to be in the best possible
solution. There's a new message
to.
here. The new message is that whatever, like, I want to tell somebody, very often I hear parents, like, we have 2 children and one of them is living at home. And I say, okay, let me explain in part why your child may be living at home when you're disappointed that that's happening, right? And so I go through the economics argument. The person feels better. Oh, wow. Or I explain, here's why you're not able to catch up to your parents. It's not all about your personal failure, right? And so the idea is that personal responsibility is something that we need and we also can't have, right? It's too dangerous. You have to do this tailored message. And I think you've been intuiting this. Like, here's the portion of your life that you're responsible for. And we're going to delineate it. And if your room isn't cleaned up, it's not because of the government, right? That was your point. Saying, and this is, again, you and I are going to have to do this at some point. This is a great country, and, well, if you put your mind to making money, then it may be the case that stick-to-itiveness and passing the marshmallow test and being inventive and creative works. But there are a lot of people who are given a very different message, and they grow up being told, be a good person and work hard, and a lot of this stuff doesn't work the way it used to. It just doesn't, and lying about it offends me. So I want to say, look, if making money is very important, and we need to be able to talk about the role of money. Money is fungible. Everything else is not. So if you make money, then you have lots and lots of options. And we need to give people the idea that that's a good thing to pursue if they have any hope and dream. But it's also the case that fundamentally what your message is you have to make the copay. And the copay is the part of your life that you absolutely control. And if that's out of control, don't expect anyone else to take any sympathy.
Well, then you can also if that part of your life is in order, you can also make a more credible argument for the existence of unreasonable systemic impediments. Because you can say to yourself, look, I put everything into this, and then you can make a credible case.
This is why this is the attractive version of the personal responsibility thing. But the point...
So we have another problem here with our discussion about dispossession, because like one of the things that's bothered me about the left and the right is the right tends to think, well, if you just got your act together and worked hard, you can make it, and the left tends to think, well, everybody's the same, and if you removed systemic impediments, then everybody could do whatever they needed to do. Well, the left is wrong because there's a real diversity of ability, but the right is wrong because there's a real diversity of ability. And so, for example, there is a distribution of IQ, which is real, and the psychometric data basically indicate that if you have an IQ of less than 90, which is about 15–20% of the population, you actually can't read well enough to follow instructions. And you might say, well, that can be rectified, say, through educational means and so forth, and the evidence for that is pretty damn thin. And so the problem with a society that's meritocratic, fundamentally, even if it's meritocratic based on character, is that there's still going to be individual differences that seem to be innate, that are going to produce radically unequal outcomes, many of which are painful.
Yes, but the thing that you will have a hard time convincing me of, having gone through the PhD system in the sciences, is that some of the world's most brilliant people hold PhDs in the sciences. And I came up at a time when, in the early 90s, these people were told that the world was their oyster and that we were desperately in need of scientists. And I remember a friend of mine being told that he had a $14,000 a year job offer post-PhD from MIT with a pregnant wife. And the person who offered it was like, this is great, we can get people for pennies.
Right.
And why was that? It was because of something that came out of the National Academy of Sciences and the National Science Foundation to slam American workers in the sector. This is very, very important. It had predicted that people would be paid 6 figures for PhDs, which was, larger than they had been paid for a long time. And it was the meddling with the market. The thing that I don't like about the personal responsibility issue is that individuals should not be solving the problems of, let's say, tech groups getting together and say, we will not poach each other's employees. That, like, the market has to work for people, not just institutions. And if you're in a sector in which you can make the market work for you, you have this feeling of anybody can do this. And in fact, what you need to do is you need to migrate to these sectors, because there are other sectors where you have, let's say, government intervention, which says we are going to interfere with the free working of the market, or we are not going to take into account that some people produce public goods. And so it's very important to me to understand that some people are coming out of very different circumstances in which it's very unlikely that they will be able to make their world grow and blossom, and that other people of extraordinary ability and high IQ and work ethic find themselves not fighting forces that they don't even understand.
Well, this is the sort of criticism that's often levied at me, because people say, well, you don't take the systemic problem sufficiently into account. And so that's a nice outline of the systemic problems.
You know, when the banks decided that they should be self-regulating with respect, to their gearing ratios or the risk, there was one guy who wrote in at this SEC hearing to allow these investment banks to, do the last little bit before 2008 blew up everything. This guy Len Bollet, who was a computer consultant to banks, it's like one guy in the entire country saw a disaster coming and got involved in this internal game that was by banks for banks. And so what's very important to me is to understand, when you have bad behavior by institutions, it is pathological to put that responsibility on individual shoulders.
Well, the only coda I would make to that, and I think that's a fair comment, is that what I'm hoping and what I'm trying to convince people of is that their ethical responsibility, which is partly to further their own development to the degree that they can, does extend to the community. Is that you want to make ethical citizens so that they don't make mistakes that corrupt the operation of the system at a systemic level. The best way to do that, in my estimation, over the long run, is to concentrate on the ethical behavior of the sovereign citizen. Now, that doesn't address the systemic problems that are already in place.
The systems affect more people. That means that when people make vague accusations about systems that are dysfunctional, then it's not helpful. Yeah. And what I see is not, you're making very specific criticisms of very specific institutions in very specific ways. Right. And that's useful, because then we can actually have a discussion about where those systems go wrong. So you can have a discussion about...
You're not criticizing the patriarchy.
Right, exactly. We can discuss...
No, I'm trying to crowd that out.